Thank you, Per. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the approach that you have been developing for quite some time, and we have been experimenting with in several places. I'm glad that Purvi gave an overview of the challenges that we are facing in the development community, particularly when it comes to capacity strengthening. And Brenda very effectively talked about the political commitment and the political will to make things happen on the ground. But it all boils down to what kind of capacity we have at the national level. And that's something that I want to talk about. How do we develop that kind of capacity to higher education institutions that several of us are part of and working with in the last several years? Not too long ago, I was part of a Ministry of Agriculture, sitting there and trying to do some analysis for the minister as well as the permanent secretary, as and when they wanted information in food security and food policy, agriculture policy, and so on. But too often we will find people coming in with, sharp people coming in with briefcases and walk in from multilateral agencies and bilateral agencies, and they'll say, oh, we want to do this for your country. And okay, fine, we'll all get together, and the principal secretary will call for a meeting, and we'll ask, can we do some analysis so that we can guide you in the process? And generally, things have changed a little bit, not too much. The reaction is, no, you don't have the capacity, but we have our consultants with us. They will be here in your country for 15 days and do a plan for next 5 years for you. And that typically what happens even now in several countries. And it's true, isn't it? Sometimes we don't seem to have the capacity, and we can't fight that back. We can't say, oh, look, we have capacity, we have done this research. It's also true that we don't have that capacity, not only the multidisciplinary capacity that we are trying to have, but also even this single disciplinary capacity. So that has been a challenge for us in terms of saying this is what we want for us, so that we have a plan, we have a goal, we can achieve that by taking your help that you are trying to give us. And that is the perspective from which we are coming in. But that requires what we call policy entrepreneurship within the country, the local capacity to build so that we can know what we want and also provide evidence for what we are trying to do in terms of plans and policies. Quickly, we'll talk about various approaches and innovations that we talk about for policy entrepreneurship. And we will introduce the Cornell case study method. We have tried to address this multidisciplinary capacity problem using this approach, but we'll kind of share in this presentation quickly the lessons and implementations from implementations, and what are the challenges for scaling up this kind of approaches, particularly when it comes to multidisciplinary policy making. Some challenges for the regular typical universities, even in the north and south. We'll talk about that and some conclusions. That will lead to into the next presentation on the demonstrating this method as we go along. Quickly, we need policy entrepreneurs in order to make change on the ground, and it has to be at all levels, global level, national level, and regional level as well, because policy analysis and innovative ideas has to come from the people who are involved in problem solving. But we need to build and increase the public awareness on policy issues. And those are the places where we need policy entrepreneurs to look at what is going to happen 2 years, 3 years down the road, and what are the capacities we need, what kind of analysis we need, how can we influence policy making, and that is something that policy entrepreneurs can do. And also we need policy entrepreneurs to improve the quality of policy discussions that are pursued and effectiveness of the implementation of the policy, so that we can monitor what is happening even after the commitment is made. And because a lot of countries are making commitments and policies are implemented, but there is not effective implementation in order to reach the target audience for our target beneficiaries, for example. To expand the successful local programs into large-scale national programs, we require the policy entrepreneurs to talk about it. What are the mistakes that we are making? What lessons that we are learning from? And debate meaningfully at the country level. It's something that we need capacity for. And in addition, we need capacity to enhance the development of the context-specific policies that targets the poor, marginalized, and disadvantaged people. So we need a cadre of people who can understand what the policy issues are, how can we bring the evidence-based information to debate, and debate meaningfully, and move on in terms of policy implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and refine the policies as we go along. And I will straight go into the Cornell case study approach. Per has taken on this experiment a while ago, where it's based on case studies. In order to strengthen the policy entrepreneurship capacity, he has kind of looked at it from the social entrepreneurship approach. How do we encourage the people who are concerned about, people like Brenda, people like you and I, and about the situation on the ground? We all want to do something about it, but we have to become a force, and that requires capacity. And how do we get that into the system? One way to do that is look at the social entrepreneurship approach that's been going on for a while. But then that requires additional information in terms of real world case studies, and that's exactly what Per has done in terms of the books that we circulated, and you will see those case studies there. But also, we need to simulate real world policy making situations within an analytical and conceptual learning environment, so that we don't just talk about the problems and solutions and lessons we learn, but also students take responsibility to think about what the problems, and also bring their own experience to the floor in terms of thinking about the analytical solutions. And this involves, of course, participatory training based on the classroom discussions and presentations of cases of real issues facing policymakers. And that's the real case studies that you see in this book. But 5 years down the road, the issues may be different, that we may have to come up with new case studies as we go along. And we'll get into the details of how this method is implemented, but it's already been implemented in several universities, as you can see. Cornell University, where Per is doing this experiment for quite some time, and in Washington, D.C., Emily and I experimented this approach in American University, University of Maryland, Colorado State University, and also few schools in the state of Ohio have experimented that. In Europe, for example, Maastricht University has followed this method, Wageningen University, Royal Veterinary University in Denmark, and about 70 professors from 60 universities were brought together in this process of experimentation in South and East Asia, as well as in Sub-Saharan Africa, to participate in a workshop that was held in Bangladesh, China, and Uganda. About 25% of the people who came to that workshop are adopting this method, and we are getting feedback from them, and we will share that with you as we go along. But this is kind of catching on in terms of a pedagogical approach, where we can bring in multidisciplinary students to think about the solutions for their own problems from their own perspective. Little bit details about the Cornell case study method. The goal is to foster social and policy entrepreneurship, the kind of mindset that it is not, the policy is not somebody else's business. Policy is not the business of somebody sitting in the Ministry of Agriculture or in the Parliament. It is the business of all of us who has the knowledge capacity to think about the issues, challenges, and constraints that we are facing, at the same time bring the evidence to the debate and debate meaningfully, and provide the solutions, and to some extent advocate for the solutions, as Brenda talked about. And that's something we have to build in as part of strengthening the capacity of the students, as part of the university education. That, of course, involves active participation of the students, and that again requires changing the mentality of the students, not from just sitting back, relaxing, and listening to a lecture, but to get actively participate in the debate that's going on. And to do that, the approach is to give assignments in the form of case studies to a group of students 1 week prior to the class that will meet and discuss that particular case study. And in a typical 50-minute classroom session, we talk about, for example, this 10 to 15 minutes is a presentation of a case, the policy recommendations by the group of students to whom the case study was assigned. And you see the case studies in the book that is being circulated. And about 25 minutes to 30 minutes of general discussion moderated by the teacher, and then about 10 minutes of lecture by the teacher. It's not just students talking among themselves, but the instructor bringing points together at the end of the class and giving it in a holistic manner what the students should take away in terms of takeaway messages. And that has really worked very well in terms of engaging the students, in terms of bringing the real world problems to the students' mindset, and then they think, we can also think about it. And something that we think about from our own background can help in the debate and discussions. And that's really changing the mindset of the students as well. But the assignments are related to asking students to develop recommendations from more than one stakeholder perspective. And that include, for example, role play as different stakeholders. That's something that we will demonstrate in a few minutes by a group of students taking different perspectives of the stakeholders in a country. And if you look at the multidisciplinary task forces in food security in each one of the countries, this is the kind of setup we have. Different stakeholders coming together, debating about nutrition, debating about health and issues and so on. The presentation of policy recommendations based on case studies and think about the further research that we need. We may not have all the solutions. We may not have all the evidence in front of us. So this provides an opportunity to say, oh, we don't know about that. And that's also very important as part of discussion. And also, we divide the class into different stakeholder groups to facilitate general discussions from the viewpoint of the stakeholders as well. And we'll talk a little bit about the method itself as Emily comes and makes a demonstration. But let me move on to some of the lessons that we have learned. I won't go through each one of them because of the time limitation. But we are still finding out this 50-minute class session is too short. But some of us have the luxury of teaching for 1.5 hours or 2 classes at a time. And that really helps to deal with this kind of situation, just for your information. And again, giving assignments to the students who are not directly involved in the case studies to make them think about these case studies and come up with 2 or 3 questions that they can ask the students who are presenting the case studies really helps in terms of participation, because students who are not assigned the case studies for that particular week can sit back and relax and they say, oh, somebody is presenting some case study and so on. So you got to bring the class together as you go along, because students can take it easy as they go along. And of course, students prefer more lectures because they can take a break in your class because they have been taking classes one after another. But the challenge is how to balance between the presentations and the combination of student discussions and some introductory lecture, and the finishing lecture really helps. Let me move on to American University. And we did teach that at a graduate level last spring. And we had quite an interesting lessons from that. It's a slight variation of the Cornell approach, but adopted from the case studies that you are seeing right now in front of you. The key lesson there is unless the teacher gives the take-home messages at the end of the class, the key messages of the case study may be lost. And you need to bring the students together and say, this is what we are doing, and these are the lessons that we have learned from the presentations and the debate. And that really helps in terms of debate as well. From University of Maryland, it was a very short period that we had 6 classes that was given to us. And we introduced the cases in terms of the food crisis that we are facing right now. And students were able to think about this global issue in the context of a particular country. Groups of students were assigned different countries: Bangladesh, Nigeria, Mozambique, Kenya, and Peru. And they all were very excited because they were empowered to think about the global issue that they are reading in the newspapers. At the same time, think about in the context of a particular country, and given the opportunity to go and look at the country situation and then come up with the solutions and present it to the rest of the class. And that really helped for the students to think about that they can be the people who can think about the solution rather than absorbing what is given to them as lectures. And moving on, Colorado State University, we were not involved in it, but there is an article published based on the case study that they used. And the effective lessons that we are learning there is the multiple choice questions, for example. This case study approach is not coming really easy in terms of answering the questions. So that's something that we are learning. So you need to test the students differently when you use this approach, this pedagogy approach. And of course, instructors should provide synthesis comments to emphasize main points, the same kind of lesson that we learned from other contexts as well. We can talk about this in detail, but I'm going to move on to the real challenges that we are facing at the higher education level.
Do that in half a minute?
Let's do that in half a minute. And we are all from different universities here, and it's not new to us. Changing curriculum is very difficult. Changing the mindset is difficult. We are all living in silos, as Per always says, and we are in a faculty-driven, tenure-driven situation where we have to be narrow-minded, so to speak, publish in our own narrow field to get on in our career thing. But that also brings a challenge to us to bring the faculties together, bring the students together from different avenues. But again, innovations in pedagogy is always possible, and this is something that we need to think about as we go along. And it's also in the context of multidisciplinary policy making, and this conference is talking about that. For example, food security, malnutrition, and HIV/AIDS is something that we need to develop capacity for. And it's a very classic example where we can use multidisciplinary capacity strengthening in order to achieve our goals. And finally, some conclusions. Multidisciplinary problems require multidisciplinary capacity, and we are still continuing to build capacity in a narrow fields. But at some point, we can converge, and this is time that we start thinking about it. Current pedagogical approaches treat problems in a disciplinary silos, but as we talked about, we need to think about how to bring these ideas together, capacities together. Students are taught policy analysis, but not prepared to take the role of policy entrepreneurs, and we need to prepare them. And this is an approach that we can actually use to bring to that students to that level. And the pedagogy or some other methods that we can think about can fill that kind of a gap. But we need contextualizations. How do we contextualize this method depending on the country, depending on the situation that you are in, depending on short-term training versus long-term training, depending on undergraduate versus postgraduate. That's something that we should think about. Let me stop here, Per. Thank you.